Okay, hopefully everybody can hear me. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Good morning, I'm Peter Marsh, partner at Workplace Architecture and Design. I want to thank all of you for joining us. We have a pretty big crowd in attendance. We had about 75 people register for this webinar. Before we begin, I want to thank my team at Workplace Architecture and Design for spending the last couple of weeks assembling resources and articles on the subject. The articles are posted on our website, as you can see on the slide, workplacead.com under the Knowledge Center. And that was one of our main intents in putting this webinar on, was for us to do a deep dive into all the problems associated with getting a workplace restarted in this environment. I also want to thank my staff here at Flywheel for helping me out with the putting the webinar on and being the host location. Today, our panelists are going to focus on how companies can adapt so that their workplaces are controlled and following the best practices for screening, sanitation, social distancing, and flexible work strategies. We're also going to cover cultural changes that these restrictions are going to bring. If employees and visitors are not confident in the company's approach, it's going to erode trust. Group work, social interactions, celebration of achievements, and performance goals are all going to have to be treated differently in today's environment. So facility managers and real estate executives are faced with a big challenge in the next 2 years, not only trying to reseat their employees in their commercial buildings, but also keeping up with occupancy counts in compliance with social distancing. Workplace and our, hold on, we're going to try to advance our slides here. Try clicking with the mouse. There we go. So Workplace and our sister company, Flywheel, had the pleasure to participate in the recent COVID-19 Startup Weekend. This was a national event focused on tech ideas, solving problems created by the pandemic and exploring the role that technology might play. There were 964 registered attendees, 500 out of the West and 642 out of the Eastern United States. There were 51 project submissions, 54 organizing volunteers, and 36 event partners that participated. This was 2 weeks ago. One of the projects submitted is called CoSpacer, which is a project that Workplace, Flywheel, and one of our startup companies, Motorco, that specializes in geolocation and mobile apps developed. The app uses anonymized Bluetooth signals from mobile phones and beacon technology for precise interior positioning. And for those of you that are familiar, both Google and Apple provide interior maps using their map technology. The problem is that the maps are not very precise. They're only precise to around 10 meters, which is fine if you're driving a car, but not so fine if you're trying to seat people in a corporate work environment. So this application enables you to upload a CAD floor plan, log in its coordinates, and then monitor occupancy counts by floor. And it allows you to check for distancing compliance. So the application is in MVP stage. We're developing it for our own co-working locations. And we're hopeful that if the app works as we anticipate, we'll be able to provide a service to our corporate clients. It's just one example of a lot of emerging technology. And if you're interested in learning more, just send me an email. So now I want to introduce our panelists. Today we have with us Shannon Meyer. Shannon, give us a wave so everybody knows who you are. Shannon's a real estate broker and property manager with Grubb Properties at 500 West 5th, where our offices are located. We have with us Steve Bean. Steve, give us a wave. Steve is Director of Facilities, EH&S, and Site Services at Corvo, Inc. I'm not sure Steve's been promoted yet. Can you check the attendees? And he is? Okay, all right, good. Steve, good to have you with us. Coleman Team is with us today, partner at Front Street Capital, Southeast real estate and developer that I think most of us are familiar with. We have David Seibert, who is Vice President of Real Estate and Development at the Fresh Market. David, give us a wave. Buddy Thomas is on the phone, and I asked Buddy for a headshot. It didn't come in time, so Buddy, I don't think you're on video, but we use Brad Pitt for your headshot. I hope that's okay. Buddy is Vice President of Real Estate and Development with Flow Automotive, and he is also my landlord, so I got to treat him nicely on this call. And then last but not least, we have Greg Wilson, a real estate executive that I've known pretty much since the founding of Workplace Strategies. He's an executive vice president with CB Richard Ellis. Okay, so for the attendees on the call, as we move through this panel discussion, if you have any questions, just post them in the chat room. And when it comes time for Q&A at the end, we'll be glad to scroll through the questions that have been posted and pose them to the panelists. So what I'm going to do is kind of moderate this. Panelists, feel free to jump in as you see fit. I am going to direct the questions to specific panelists to try to keep some organization here. But again, if you've got something interesting to add, please jump in. So we're going to start out with a couple of kind of general questions. And I think I'll start with Dave Seibert on this one. Dave, if you want to unmute. So there's a lot of guidance out, right? There's federal, state, local, and I think we're all pretty much following Governor Cooper's guidance. But you kind of need a framework for dialing up and dialing down your workspace protocols and guidelines, depending on where the community spread is, whether it's increasing or decreasing. Dave, how are you approaching that? What kind of procedures do you all have in mind, both for your corporate environment and for your retail stores? Fresh Market has a whole lot of locations throughout the Midwest and the East Coast. So what are you doing in that regard?
Yeah, it certainly is. Certainly our guidelines, our benchmarks are from the authorities, also CDC guidance weighs very heavily into what we consider. We have a task force that initially was meeting twice a day to help work through the ever-changing guidance, quite frankly, to work through input that we're getting both from our employees and our customers and find a conservative and reasonable path forward. Obviously, adherence to guidelines that were enacted was, the benchmark, but really the question was trying to have an actionable and executable set of guidance that we could apply across the stores, not necessarily equal per store, because as you mentioned, there are certainly regional differences, but clear and consistent guidance that makes sense based on location. So short answer to the question is we have a task force that considers all guidance coming from federal, state, CDC, and kind of amalgamating that into a single answer for our stores.
Gotcha. Anybody else want to add to that or give more observations on that? So I think next I'm going to go to really the entire panel, but we'll start with Greg. Greg, obviously, pretty much every business in the United States suddenly had to convert to remote work. What have you observed with the clients that you serve Shannon, same question for you. What are you two observing about how that's working and how corporations, how they've gone about enabling a remote workforce, which is also going to have a big impact on, the restarting the corporate work environment. So Greg, we'll start with you. What have you been seeing?
Sure, Peter, and thanks again for hosting this. Obviously, like everybody else, we have been on numerous Zoom calls, GoToMeeting, Microsoft Teams, and just the standard dial-up. We've been fortunate to be pretty busy throughout the whole COVID-19 mess. And most of our clients are, out of state. So, being able to see folks, to communicate, to share screens, the technology has certainly allowed us to continue business. I can't say it's quite as efficient as it normally is with in-person meetings, but it certainly is working.
Let me kind of build on that with Steve Bean. Steve, are you on?
Yes.
Okay. What for the enabling piece, and the reason I'm asking these questions is, with social distancing, it's going to be impossible to reseat all of your user populations the way your floor plans were created previous to COVID, obviously. So I'm assuming that remote work is still going to be part of the solution, having teams work remotely, maybe incorporating shift work, staggering days that different departments might show up. I want to start with you, Steve. How are you doing that, and what kind of productivity tools are you using, to help with project management, social interaction, to kind of keep the corporate culture together in this environment?
Yeah, well, so for us, since we're a global organization, global company anyway, we had already been utilizing a lot of the technology to allow us to meet. So we have Teams-based meetings, even within my own group. Obviously, my counterparts are different cities.
So same question for you, Dave. What
The biggest,
go ahead.
I was going to say the biggest shift for us was just the working from home. But that was actually something that we had put in our strategic site development plan 3 years ago, when we were starting to project our headcount was just trending us towards needing more space as an alternate to building buildings or leasing more. We had a work from home strategy that we had introduced. There wasn't a big a buy-in from it, from the executive staff, but I think what's happened during all this is we've proved that there has been no loss of productivity. Again, a large number of our people, we have folks, and I've been in this situation before, where you manage people at other sites, so they're not even available to meet with you regularly. So we, as a company, it wasn't a harsh transition for us in terms of coming back and keeping social distancing. We're working on that right now, but certainly part of our plan is a phased reintroduction of staff, and work from home is going to be, I don't see how it cannot be a continued practice for us. To get us through the initial push, we do have on-site manufacturing at our major locations in the U.S. So we had reduced the number of people on site with work from home, but those folks that had to come in to physically do work, they were put on shifts. So we split shifts. Most of those folks in manufacturing already worked a shift, a designated shift anyway, but we've kept as much as possible everyone segregated so that if by chance we had a confirmed case on a shift, it couldn't wipe out the entire production staff. So we will continue to do something along that line. As far as physically separating people, we're working on what new barriers we can put up. We've changed signage. We've got unidirectional stairways. We've got paths to get in and out of the building. We have temperature screenings. We've invested in scanning cameras, which will let you go by pretty quickly and enter a building and everyone's scanned. Introduction of masks, those kind of things. But we've tried to do that consistently across all of our sites. with enough flexibility to let the site manage the application. So I have counterparts who have all their functions in one building. Here in Greensboro, I have a campus, so I have multiple buildings, so it looks a little different. The reintroduction of cafeteria services, we segregate seating, we designate how many people can be in a conference room, those kind of things. So it's an evolving process, but we've tried to be aggressive in our approach.
Okay, real quickly, Dave, are you doing similar things?
Yeah, very, very similar. Sounds a lot the same. Phasing in our return to work, evaluating our remote work posture as far as a percentage of who does that, and making many of the same evaluations and adjustments to the workspace.
Okay. Shannon, Coleman, I'm going to get to you. Don't worry. Shannon, real quick, for you and Buddy, if he's on the call and his audio is on, what changes are you planning? So Shannon is a property manager here at 500 West 5th, which is a tower building in Winston-Salem that both Workplace and Flywheel occupy on the 8th floor. What kind of changes are you planning on making at your entry points and your circulation zones, things of that nature, in a multi-tenant building context? I know Steve touched on a few things. What can you add, Shannon?
One thing that we are definitely doing that's important is limiting 2 people per elevator. So we're going to be putting up some additional signs and some floor signs that mark locations where you wait for those elevators and you're 6 feet apart to continue social distancing. We are making sure that we have signage just to remind people of what's happening, and all the things they should be doing anyway. It's evolving and changing, and I do think that as companies come back in, that they will phase in, which is, I think, a good way for us to, monitor the things we're doing and see how those things are going to work.
Buddy, if can you say something if you're on? I want to ask you a few questions as well.
Yeah, I'm on, Peter.
Okay, good deal. We talked a little bit a couple days ago about approaches you might make at 500 West 5th regarding, when people are entering the building, they're going to probably queue up a little bit. How are you going to try to manage that? Maintain social distancing at entry points. And I think I saw you put Purell dispensers throughout the lobby and kind of on the entry path to the elevators. Can you talk a little bit about your plans and talk about how Flow Automotive is approaching their workspaces as far as social distancing?
Well, Peter, to start, I guess we'd say that we're following the CDC guidelines very closely for social distancing and the monitoring of safe spaces. Here at 500 West 5th, as you mentioned, and I think Shannon mentioned as well, we've got the antibacterial hand dispensing machines as soon as you walk in the building and then entering the elevator lobbies. We're going to take that further. As Shannon was talking about it, we'll put social distancing signs on the floor, kind of indicating where people should walk and the distances they should remain from one another. We've been doing, ever since this started in March, we've been limiting elevator cab occupants to 2 people per elevator cab, and we'll actually put signs on the floors in the elevator cabs, denoting where people should stand. So those are the items that we've done here. At this point, we're not going to be doing any thermal scanning of people entering the building or not. If tenants want to do that, then they can do that in their own spaces, but we won't be doing that from the building perspective. And to kind of talk briefly about what we've been doing at all of the dealerships, we've completed all the social distancing requirements. We've even indicated aisles where people, when they enter the buildings, in should stand and how far apart people should be. We've supplied, there's gloves that we have at all the dealerships, face masks, if people would like a mask. All of our employees are masking and wearing the disposable gloves, at all times. And then anytime we enter a customer's car, we wipe the car down completely. The flow employee would have the face mask on and gloves on, and then the car would be wiped down as soon as anybody gets in or out of that car. So those are things that we're doing at the dealerships and have been doing those all along.
Okay. Good deal. So Coleman, I'm going to go to you now in terms of what you're seeing with the buildings that you have under management and the clients that you're serving. What are you hearing in terms of the whole problem of social distancing? I'm assuming that most of your companies are going to have a phased reentry and a kind of a scheduled use of the workspace, since they can't basically reload the buildings at the same density levels. So you're going to have to de-densify buildings. How are they going about that? What are you hearing from your clients and your tenants about how they plan to go about handling their workspace? And that includes, is anybody doing, any significant reconfiguring to try to support social distancing or kind of change their work environment?
Yeah, so our asset management team across our portfolio of about 3.5 million feet, we've got everything from medical offices that have their own set of issues right now to industrial spaces that are now trying to separate workers and that work process to compact office environment. So it's really, for us, it's been all about communication. We're talking to the Steves and the Daves and our tenants, understanding what their specific plans are. And then tailoring those to fit the assets. So it is same thing as everybody said, utilizing the CDC guidelines to come up with a very transparent and, very clear process from the time you get out of your car to the time that you're in your office space. And that's with signage and notifications and very, out in front and forward facing sanitization. So for us, it's about making people feel confident to go back to work and to get back into these buildings and do so in a safe manner. So we do have people that are likely going to be having you can work from home a few days a week. And there will be certain phases where if there's an open work environment, they're encouraging or dividing up staffs, or some people will be coming in the office during phase one at different times during the week. So, our industrial processes in some of our buildings, they're not fully loading the staffs back in. So it really varies by user. We're obviously having to significantly ramp up in the number of occurrences for janitorial crews coming in and what exactly they're doing. So it's pretty widespread.
Got it. So just to kind of finish up on the social distancing piece, I'm going to throw this out to Buddy, David, and Steve. Have you done any reconfiguring of workspaces, or are you simply spreading people out by combining remote work with on-site work and kind of a shift work approach? Have you done any reconfiguring? Buddy, let's start with you.
We have done well, actually, that's not true. We haven't done reconfiguring, but we have moved people out of this location into satellite locations, reconfigured at those locations where we could make sure we were maintaining proper and adequate social distancing for all of our workforce here at 500 West 5th.
Steve, what about you?
Yeah, we haven't done any for the purpose of social distancing. We're actually in the middle of a project where we were installing and replacing our cubicle layout with a new standard that we have. You're familiar with, Peter, in our building M, but we've added some changes to it, which gives some separation panels So what we're doing instead is we've gone back to the vendor to say, can you provide us with additional panels that stack up and provide a barrier between folks. For our separation coming back, we're using, we have a new CAFM system that we've just installed and are rolling out. And it allows us to plan where people go and plan we're actually going to use it for scheduling them to come back on site. And what we'll do is we'll separate them physically when they come back on in phases to keep them apart. And that'll give us time to go back and see what we have to do to change our physical spaces.
Got it. Dave, what about you? Any changes?
The only changes right now are really reducing occupancy of meeting rooms by essentially removing chairs as a quick step. We're evaluating what adjustments might have to be made and controlling the spacing through remote work staffing levels at this point.
Got it. So I want to talk next about screening. So, you know, the whole issue of we've learned now some of the COVID symptoms are presentable and some are not. You know, you don't really know whether an individual has COVID or not. However, those that do present symptoms, you know, you want to be able to either prevent them from getting into the building or isolate them and get them out of the building. What approach are y'all taking to screening your own employees and screening guests, you know, visitors that are coming to the building? Shannon, let's start with you on that, and then we'll go to Coleman.
Grub Properties as a whole, just what we are doing is asking the employees to self-screen. So take your temperature before coming to work. If you have any symptoms, stay home. Most everyone is working from home, but obviously we have a heavy maintenance staff. So maintenance folks have to be on site. So it's even more important that they are taking their temperatures and they're staying at home if they're feeling any symptoms of COVID whatsoever or something similar to COVID. We, you know, kind of watching my tenant base, 500 West 5th and my other locations, a lot of folks are doing temperature checks. I have some that are doing them in the building as employees and vendors come in, because I think it's also important that, you know, anyone coming into the building, whether it's a visitor, a vendor, a contractor to do work, we need to make sure that they're all practicing, you know, and taking appropriate measures to make sure that they're not bringing in any contagious virus. So some sites have been doing it inside the building. I know of a couple of large corporations in Greensboro where they actually have tents set up and it's a drive-through screening process. So before you get out of your car, they screen you. And if you have a fever, then they send you home. You never even enter the building. I think what's happening with those types of things is that I haven't seen them sending people home. I think what it's doing is people know, the associates know that this is going to happen and that they're going to have to turn around and go home. So if they are feeling any symptoms or have a low-grade fever or fever at all, they're just staying at home. I haven't seen any logs of, you know, where temperatures were taken and people were sent away. So I think it's helping to keep everyone, you know, doing the right thing.
Got it. Coleman, what are you seeing from that perspective?
Yeah, the earliest we saw of this, which is an interesting way to see it happen before all this opened back up, was on our construction sites. So our construction crews obviously were deemed as an essential business. So we have large construction sites with a lot of people coming in and out of them. And that's where we first saw very rigid guidelines set up where people are every vendor, every subcontractor that steps on site, and again, this is going to be translated directly into the office workers, must have self-screened. When they come on site, they have to have repped that they have not had a temperature. There's all the CDC questions that you have about your travel, your symptoms, everything. And if they have to check in when they come on site, and whenever they leave the site, they also have to sign out, physically sign out, every individual. So, and we've had a couple instances where people were notified they had a fever and they were not allowed back on site for a number of weeks and they had to self-quarantine. And we see that it's going to be the same way with all of our vendors that are accessing any building. So any vendor that we have going on site has to make every one of those reps and self screenings before they are entered the building. And if they have answer yes to any of the questions, they obviously are not allowed admittance. We're leaning on our tenants through our urged communication to them that they're handling all the screenings for their individual personnel. We're obviously putting all of our, physical signs of encouragement and what our expectation is all over the buildings and an email format to all of our tenants. But we can really control what happens on the vendor side, and it is working so far. It is catching what it is supposed to catch. People feel comfortable and safer now that those guidelines are in place.
Greg, let me ask you a couple of questions on this screening piece. If someone begins to present symptoms on site, are you seeing your clients setting up wellness rooms? I know a lot of corporations already have wellness rooms for people that become ill on site, but are you seeing kind of an increase in the number of wellness rooms being deployed? And then the second question is about resistance to screening. Actually, this is for the entire panel. Is anyone seeing resistance to things like being screened, wearing masks, following, the hand washing protocols and so forth? So Greg, we'll start with you on those two questions.
On the wellness rooms, obviously it's a very fluid situation. We're probably a couple of weeks from going back to work, so I have not seen any official policies about wellness rooms, nor have I heard clients mentioning it. I think some of the larger work sites, such as Steve is facing, with that amount of population, I feel like there will definitely be a need for wellness sites to potentially bring a person, quarantine them if they're showing symptoms. Once it's diagnosed, and I'm assuming, they're going to have to self-quarantine at their homes.
Yeah. So on the second part of that question, there's the we're all in this together attitude, which is very true, but sometimes some people are more in it together than others. Are you all experiencing any resistance to the requirements for wearing masks? We haven't talked about that yet, but I think most of, the governor has indicated you should wear masks when you leave your home. Definitely, when you're in a public environment or in circulation spaces. Curious about first the resistance piece, and then maybe specifically what your policies are on masks. Why don't we start with Buddy?
Peter, we haven't really seen any resistance. We've had to continually communicate in the building, as we've been open the entire time this has been going on. We've had to continue to communicate that we requestfully respect and respectfully ask people to wear masks while they're in the common areas, as they're entering the building, coming through the lobby, elevator lobbies, until they get in their workspaces. Flo put out guidelines for all our employees regarding wearing masks in the building and at their workspaces if they cannot, get proper social distancing from somebody else. Now, we really haven't seen anybody not adhering to that. We've had to keep reminding people. And I think something that Coleman alluded to earlier is really important, is being very transparent and upfront and communicate all the guidelines to everybody and continue to communicate that to your tenants.
Got it. David, what about you? What are you requiring in terms of masks or other PPE that you might be providing to your employees, and are you getting any resistance?
Yeah, so we're certainly enforcing self-screening fairly strictly. That's been embraced. Likewise, PPE, masks, gloves where appropriate, are both provided and enforced in our stores. And in fact, we've asked our customers to utilize face coverings when they shop our stores. We're contemplating implementing temperature checks in the stores. We have the equipment to do so. We're thinking through the processes and implications of that. Generally, and this was mentioned earlier, generally this is embraced by our employees essentially as appreciating the fact that we're working to make their workspace safer, and have had only limited pushback. And really it's more of a adjustment period to working with the PPE.
Steve, what about you? What are you requiring with your employees, and what's the cooperation like?
Right. So we have similar policies on people on site. We actually don't allow any visitors that are non-essential. Anybody who comes on has to do all the same self-assessments. Plus, if they've traveled outside of a 50-mile radius, we have to have executive approval to allow them on site. So this extends to our contractors. So for our employees, there hasn't been pushback. I think most of them appreciate what we're doing to try to keep them safe. Starting Monday, we're actually going to require masks, that everyone wear them on site. Again, we had a reduced workforce for the most part up to this point. The majority of them work in a clean room environment, and by nature of that, they're wearing masks anyway, clean room suits and masks. So when we have protocols set up for isolation rooms, we've got those designated supplies, how we vet, our HR will vet contacts, secondary contacts, and we have the cleaning protocols to go in and clean. So all that's in place. And someone else said it, we've been very transparent with the entire workforce on what we're doing and why, and reassuring them that, for instance, if we have a suspected case, we immediately go in and clean any location where that person might have been, and everyone sees that. And so I think that puts them at ease. So any additional, if you will, restriction that we place on them, getting into our buildings, there's only one door you can come in every building, and your temperature is scanned. And like Shannon said, a lot of that is a deterrent. If someone's not feeling good, they're not going to show up. So that's helpful. But if they do happen to get sick, we have protocols for that too. So anything we put in place, removing chairs in the cafeteria, limiting people in conference rooms, I think everyone, even though it's an inconvenience, understands why. So we haven't had, we've had one or two people that don't like, having to get their temperature scanned every time. And for instance, if I walk outside the door here, I've got to get scanned to come back in. Every time you leave a building, you're rescanned. So it's an inconvenience, but people understand why. So that transparency and putting the signage up and showing people why you're doing it has gone a long way toward getting buy-in from our employees.
I want to remind attendees on the call to go ahead and pose your questions to the chat function. If you scroll down to the bottom of your Zoom window on your toolbar, there's a option to chat with the participants, and that's where we need you to post your questions of the panelists. We'll be coming to that pretty soon. So next, let me ask on the property management side. So this will be include Greg, Coleman, and Shannon. Tell us about sanitizing procedures. What are you doing? What are you seeing your tenants do? And are there any specific products that you want to talk about, whether it's PPE or sanitizing methods that you want to share with the audience? So, Greg, why don't we start with you? Talk to us about what policies and procedures you're seeing around sanitizing buildings.
Sure, I can speak to our office. We have 35 employees in the Triad, and starting next week, there's going to be a window to come and basically have everybody clean everything off their desk. There'll be small groups coming in, maintaining social distancing. Once everything is off the desk, they will do a thorough deep clean, as I've been told, of the entire office before letting any employees come back. I think any of the high touch areas will be cleaned multiple times during the day. We do not have specific guidelines on, food preparation within the office, the number of folks within a conference room. I'm sure all that's coming. Still to be determined whether we're going to be wearing masks when we're in the office. but I do know that, that's something that's being looked at.
Coleman, what about you? Curious, have any of your buildings actually had a COVID case or a COVID contact, and what kind of sanitizing are you doing as a normal course? And if there were a case, what would you do?
Yeah, so one of the heavy things that we are encouraging, it's not cheap option, but through the Bud Group, they have a program where they'll come in and it's an application. It's emitted like a fog or a spray, and it basically creates a protective layer on every surface. And it's a medical grade cleaning agent, and it lasts on surfaces for up to 6 months. So if companies right now, it's obviously the one time that I think people would do this. We've done it in all the spaces that we occupy and control. We've encouraged all tenants to potentially take a look at this. So that is something I would certainly recommend anyone reaching out to their asset management teams to reach out to their janitorial companies, because I'm sure all of them provide it at this point in time. I think it's a no-brainer at this point. We're probably going to do it every 3 months rather than every 6 months. We're doing a minimum of every single tenant space will have a 5-day surface wipe down. Every common surface will be wiped down with sanitization 5 days a week, including desk spaces. We are obviously flooding our common areas in our buildings with sanitization stations and opportunities. We're encouraging people to reach out to us if they don't have access or cannot find hand sanitizers or bulk sanitizers. Trying to take care of all of that. Again, all the PPE is we're doing the same thing, trying to lead by example. I think a lot of this is going to come top down, so that when they see company leadership and corporate leadership and the teams that are responsible for keeping people safe do it, I think that the employees will fall in line. But that's really what we're primarily doing.
Sorry, you've got a pretty large portfolio, Coleman. Are you having any difficulty getting the supplies?
We were, and it certainly comes in bits and pieces. It's not a supply chain like there was prior. So it has been hard, having to go to a lot of stranger places than you typically would to get a lot of these bulk supplies to make sure people are adequately protected. But it's certainly coming back on. Like today, we got a bulk shipment from a local distillery here outside of Winston-Salem that turned their business into making hand sanitizer. They not only provide, I have it on my desk, the little bottles like this, but they also have gallon jugs that you use to refill it. So in the spaces that we can control, we're not only giving those in the common areas, but giving every single person who has a desk a bottle. And I think that should be kind of a minimum standard for most companies right now.
Yeah, that actually brings up another question that I wanted to ask. I'm going to go to Buddy next on your sanitizing procedures. But in the case of Flow, are you asking employees to participate in sanitizing the workplace? For example, if they have a meeting, after the meeting, do they clean up or do they defer to janitorial staff?
So what we've done at Flow, we did it here at 500 West, and we've done it at all the dealership locations, is we have added 1 to 2 day porters at all locations to clean throughout the day. So we're not necessarily asking our people to do the janitorial service work. We've increased all that capacity at all locations. And what we've asked them to do is wipe down, on an hourly basis, all high touch areas, high traffic areas, high touch areas, and wipe all those contact points down. The other thing that we've done, we started this back probably the 2nd or 3rd week in March. We started using an electrostatic microbial spray treatment and process. We had all of the dealerships sprayed, and we had 500 West 5th. We had all the floors here sprayed. And we have repeated that several times now at all locations. And that adds that kind of electrostatic microbial barrier on all non-porous surfaces. One of the things that I would recommend everybody, if they're going to do any spray treatment, find out for the actual product that is being sprayed, it should have a claim kill letter registered with the CDC. and it should have SDS sheets that, describe the actual product itself and the safety of the product. So that's what we've done at all locations, and we will continue to do that. With the electrostatic spray treatment in that process, one thing you have to do is you have to have all paper products removed from any surfaces that you want sprayed. And then it's kind of similar to the treatment that Coleman was talking about. It's a very light fogging mist spray that is sprayed. It's safe. It's safe for your employees to enter back into those spaces, within 10 to 15 minutes. Telephones can be sprayed. Keyboards can be sprayed. They will not spray computer monitors. And again, it's really addressing all the high touch areas and primarily your non-porous surfaces where the virus has been able to live, for a prolonged period of time, meaning, 3 to 4 days.
And I can attest as a tenant in 500 West 5th, Flywheel has the entire 8th floor. It's about 18,000 square feet. The confidence that gives our co-working members is tremendous to see, that day porter staff in action in the morning, during the day, and then obviously the normal janitorial crew comes in at night. But in addition to that, we're asking our staff to regularly clean, and we're also asking our members to take charge of their own destiny and make sure that they wipe down and sanitize all the horizontal surfaces when they leave for the day and also after any meetings that they have. Steve, what about you? What about your employees? Are you asking them to participate in any of these procedures?
We have the janitorial services that follow CDC guidelines, and we've increased their cleaning in the high traffic areas multiple times a day. We do make supplies available for the employees. We don't ask them or require them to go and do any formal cleaning function. Inside our clean rooms, they have that as part of their protocol anyway. But outside in the office areas, break rooms, we make available cleaning supplies, on every table, and so they can grab them. There's hand sanitizers and just units stationed around the buildings. So certainly anytime someone feels, if they walk up to a table and they're not sure it's clean, they can grab the solution and wipe it down if they'd like. But we do reassure them and tell them what our cleaning schedules are so that they understand that they're being serviced.
Okay, at this point, if it's okay with everybody, I'd like to go to the questions that are coming in from the audience. Susan Morris, who is program manager for Venture Cafe, which is a large gathering, was a large gathering and has now gone virtual. I'm sure they're looking forward to going back to the in-person gathering. She asks, what concessions are being made for staff and customers who are immune compromised, older than 60, et cetera? So why don't we start with David on that one?
So certainly for a period of time, and I think it still exists, the Fresh Market has offered early shopping hours, the first hour of the day for customers older than 60. Beyond that, essentially, we're taking more universal precautions to protect everyone. Certainly the supporting stay-at-home guidelines through remote work is probably the most aggressive. And then, again, all the processes we're doing to provide a safe and sterile work environment.
Okay, anybody else want to add to that one? Let's see. Next, what's the protection claim for 6 months, and is that a guarantee? I think that refers to the sanitizing product that you were talking about, buddy. Or maybe it was Coleman.
The one that we use from the company Protex, it's a 99.9% effective and up for 6+ months is what it says. It's similar to the label you see on a Clorox bottle. So then I'm not sure they're warrantying anything, but they do have labels on it, like Buddy said, about the green nature of it, about where it comes from, how it's handled. the process in which it happens. They're very transparent about what's in it. But it's what they're saying is it's 99.9% effective for over 6 months.
From Clay Daniels, this is a good one. We haven't talked about HVAC and the role that that kind of plays in terms of conveying, airborne virus. Clay says there are several proven technologies for air handling equipment that can enhance overall quality in buildings. Some of these technologies include UV lights that can be added onto the supply side of air. Who has some observations about any engineering modifications that are being considered for HVAC, and is anyone exploring this UV technology? Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, we're looking at it. We actually have it in some of our other locations. There's just some things on large air handling units that the integration of the UV light is a simple task to say in your residential unit, but it is highly effective, and it's something that in the long term, when you're looking at the alternative, is a good investment. So I think that's something that's valid to explore.
Anybody else want to add to that on the HVAC systems? We've heard that bringing in more outdoor air is a good thing. David, are you looking at anything like that?
We're actually evaluating several possible technologies, including the UV, looking for something that could be applicable to the fleet of stores. So we're still in the investigation stage at this point.
Gotcha. Here's a good one that I hadn't thought of. What about parking garages? Does social distancing apply there? Has there been any communication to employees about that? Buddy, why don't you chime in on that one, since you're an automotive guy?
We haven't made any changes to the parking deck as far as delineating which spaces people can park in and which ones they can't. So that's the only thing that I can speak to on that one.
So you're not requiring people to space their cars out or whatever. That would be kind of a bummer for parking capacity.
Yeah, that would be difficult. At the dealerships, we started the program, of picking cars up, people's homes for service, and that way, our service clients wouldn't even have to come to the dealerships. But here, as far as in the parking deck, we haven't made any allocation as to, again, delineating spaces that can or can't be parked in.
Here's a question from Magali Wyacinth, who is a leader in our entrepreneurship ecosystem. She asks, she's happy to hear you all aren't experiencing any resistance, but she's wondering about security. As facilities reopen, are there any changes in procedures to your security, making sure that, if in a time where people are experiencing a lot of stress, it's easy for folks to kind of deviate from their standard behavior, if you will. Are any of you considering changes to security? Greg, what have you seen?
I have not seen changes to security. And again, I'm speaking a little bit from a disadvantage. I'm more on the transaction side of the business, and I'm not, active day to day in property management. I think, Shannon and Buddy could speak to the security procedures at 500 West 5th. I know they do have 24/7 security in both the building lobbies and for the parking deck.
So Peter. Shannon, have you changed? I'll be right with you, David. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Shannon, have you changed any of the procedures with your security folks, or even talked to them about being careful?
Our security folks here at 500 West 5th and at the property I manage in Greensboro, we have 24/7 security at both of those locations. In general, we have not increased security in advance of people coming back into work. but we are making sure that they are not getting complacent with, the lack of people coming in and out of the building, and just making sure that they are using the same practices that we're encouraging for everyone else, that they are wearing their mask, they're washing their hands. We're trying to make sure folks know where the appropriate distance is from the security officer if they have to stop at a desk to talk to them. And right now, though, we still are not seeing enough people coming back into the workplace to where we've even felt a need to address increase of security. At this time, we're just not there yet.
Gotcha. Another question, this is another subject we haven't really touched on, but insurance liability policies for businesses. Have you heard of any changes or anything that we might want to be aware of as it pertains to insurance liability? David, do you have anything on that, or the last question?
No changes to insurance. Regarding security, the one place where we did incorporate an increased security presence was mostly to help mitigate and enforce occupancy limits for retail stores. Certainly that was a change for many customers, and to help control the flow of traffic into the stores, explain the expectation and limitation, and essentially serve as customer relations ambassador was probably the larger role to help people understand the restrictions in place and how to follow that. So that's where we had stepped up on security at our stores.
Got it. Ed Dean asks, of all the panelists, can you get me the EPA number for the Protex product? And Ed, I can share with you that the EPA numbers are in the OSHA guidelines and the CDC guidelines, which are in the Knowledge Center on our website. But Buddy and others, if you have those EPA numbers, if you can go ahead and enter them in the chat in response to Ed, that would be great. Chelsea Godwin asks, says, I'm seeing travel outside the triad or exposure that results in 2-week self-quarantine. Are you all also requiring that for anyone who presents symptoms or has a low-grade temp? I.e., if they present symptoms, are you requiring a 2-week quarantine? David, let's go back to you on that one. And are you requiring them to quarantine or go get a test, or how are you handling that?
We're requiring testing and then following guidance from medical officials. Essentially, for our employees, they'll need a release, medical release to work, to return.
Okay, Buddy and Steve, anything to add to that? Are you guys doing the same thing?
Fine with that.
Yeah, okay. Question from one of my own designers, Maria Katsoudas. Have corporations administered surveys polling employees on their overall experience? Could the data harvested help them inform and guide corporations in expanding and capitalizing on the benefits from distributed work? So that's a good question, really. I'll let anybody that wants to jump in just unmute your microphone and contribute to this. But there's kind of two questions there. A, are you doing any surveying to see how customers, how your employees or your tenants are feeling about reopening? And then secondly, there may be a positive side to this whole thing in terms of the learnings from distributed work and the positive benefits that might be experienced with the COVID environment. So I'll just open it up to anybody that would like to respond to that. Any surveys being distributed at this point?
Peter, this is Greg. I was watching a presentation that CBRE put out this morning talking about going back to work across the U.S., and they said every employee will get a survey to see how they feel about coming back to work. I think once they're at work, there will be repeated surveys to document whether they feel like their workplace is safe. do they feel comfortable going back to work, and so forth.
So second part of that piece, on the productivity side, what is the panel observing about, some potential positive benefits of this disruptive experience that we're all going through? Coleman, why don't we start with you? Are you hearing from your tenants anything on the positive side?
Yes, I'll chime in on something we haven't spoken about yet, which is culture, which I think is one of the biggest factors for the whole work from home, socially distance impacts. We obviously are currently polling and inquiring on every tenant across our entire portfolio on what their perspective is on the work from home strategy. Obviously trying to gauge what people's footprint is going to look like in the future, whether people are going to expand, contract. I would say the majority of people are saying they are very excited about getting back to work and that their workplace culture completely depends on interacting with each other and being in the same place and working on a team. I think is giving people the confidence, though, to allow some employees to work from home on a limited basis as they so choose. So I think this has empowered people to be confident about flexibility in the workplace. We've heard things about people potentially shrinking their spaces. We've heard things about people increasing their footprint because they want to space their employees out. So I think you're going to have a bit of a varied reaction to this across the spectrum, but the vast majority of the response we've had is people are being productive, but they're definitely more productive when they're in the office. And this has a significant impact on our corporate culture, and we are excited to get back to interacting with each other in the workplace.
Those are great observations. Steve, I know your culture is, a design and engineering culture, and that collaboration is really important. What have you observed, if anything, on the positive side about this disruption and how it's influencing your productivity and your culture?
Yeah, so overall the feedback we've got is our productivity has not diminished. So that was a good thing. It kind of proves the case that work from home can be effective. A positive side benefit that we've heard informally, we haven't taken formal polls, but informally from employees and business unit managers is many folks are experiencing a better work balance, especially now as we're heading into summer, as we approach this next phase with families having kids out of school, but just being around at home gives them a more flexible work time schedule. We've heard comments about my computer's on and I take more breaks and I take a walk with the dog, but I can come back and do my work and just extend it out. And like you said, since other than our manufacturing side, which is very rigid based on the pace, the design side can be very fluid and flexible. And since we work across the globe, basically the time scale of when you work naturally lends to that flexibility. So it's been positive for us so far.
Same question for you, David. What are you experiencing?
I think a lot of people have embraced the transition to remote work. One positive that we've taken away from it is we're a lot more planful and intentional about our communication plans as we move through projects, whereas a lot of communication in the past had been impromptu and informal. That could sometimes result in not being entirely inclusive. And so we've seen a significant increase in kind of breaking through the stovepipes and being a lot more cross-functional in our project planning and execution, and are quite frankly seeing benefits from that.
Got it. I've got a question from one of your tenants, Shannon. So perk your ears up on this one. What is Grubb doing relative to restroom access?
So as of right now, restroom access has not been an issue because we have so few tenants in the building. Buddy and I have been speaking this week about what we will do as we find out how many of our tenants are coming back, and things are changing daily. We want to hear from our tenants how many people are coming back, and make sure we lay out some guidelines that's going to keep everyone safe. So I don't have an exact answer for that question yet, but it is something that is a topic of discussion, and like everyone else, we're very fluid. We're communicating with our tenants, and we'll keep everyone in the loop as far as any decisions that are made regarding restrooms or any other areas of the building.
Greg, Coleman, Steve, I know in the past, restrooms have always been a subject of conversation around sanitizing. What about social distancing? What are you observing in terms of maintaining that in your restrooms?
I know
Steve,
we've had discussions around just like conference rooms, limiting the number of people in there. There's not a lot we can do to go and physically change the space in the bathroom or to create space. It'd be very difficult
right.
in a lot of major reconstruction. So we don't have a good policy on that yet, other than just reminders of social distancing and asking folks not to crowd in. So don't have a great answer.
Yeah, I guess you could take out every other stall, but that's going to cause a little bit of a backup during certain times of the day. Greg, what are you hearing? Coleman, what are you hearing? Go ahead, Greg.
I mean, I've been to the office twice since March 13th. So in our building, I'm not sure what they're looking to do. I think, as Buddy mentioned, increasing the day porter staff, increasing the number of times that high touch surfaces are clean will certainly be the new protocol. I've even heard some doing back to the old grade school red light, green light on the bathroom doors when people go in and come out. But I have not seen that in action yet.
Agreed. I think this falls under the long list of things that are going to get shaken out when everything opens back up. So, you can do as much as you can to post documents, and we're putting up the silly little signs that the CDC puts out about how to actually wash your hands versus how we used to wash your hands, and things like that. But I mean, we're going to have to see how this happens in future.
Got it.
So, Peter, one thing that we're trying to understand is the use of barriers and mitigation where 6 feet is not possible. I think that does apply to restrooms, especially where stalls are available, and how that can help provide a level of protection even when the distance itself may not be there. But we're still actually looking for clear guidance from some authority to help us understand that trade-off.
That touches on a question that I wanted to ask earlier that I'll try to slip in here, which is on the product side, we're getting lots of creative emails from furniture manufacturers and other vendors about solutions that they have for introducing more separation between users. We're getting a lot of comments from manufacturers about cleanable surfaces as opposed to porous surfaces. I'll just throw it open to the panelists. Have you investigated or purchased any products of that kind that you want to share with the audience?
We haven't seen it really come to like complete fruition yet, but and we're currently building out plenty of upfits right now for tenants that are currently have a mix between offices and open spaces, and they are stopping and thinking about, if they had 8x8 cubes, do those go to 12x12 cubes? Do those cubes get spaced apart where they used to be all connected together? So it's all happening so quickly, and we're in the midst of it. So no one's actually been able to execute on a plan yet, but we are seeing people pause and stop and wonder about what their workspace furniture layout design looks like right now. I think everybody thinks it's going to be okay in the long run. So I don't think anybody's going to change their 7-8 year furniture plan based on what's happening right now. I think it's going to be bridging the gap between now and normal. And unfortunately, no one knows what that looks like, but they're at least people are pausing to consider what to do.
Right. And we also don't
Peter.
know, kind of culturally how the employees are going to feel long-term after they do come back and go through this whole restart experience. We think there may be an influence on space plans to carry over a little bit larger footprint, square footage per person, just in terms of the psychology coming out of this environment. Shannon, you had something to add, I think.
Yes, so I just wanted to say that once this all started, we did go to our janitorial companies and make sure that they were using products, disinfectant products that were on the CDC's approved list of products for use to kill this virus. We've continued to do that. And, you know, we've also, to hold our janitorial staff more accountable, we've created checklists to make sure that they are touching and cleaning all of the surfaces multiple times a day. So they have to check it off and put a date and time and just initial. It's a little extra work for them, but it gives us a sense of security that they're doing what we've asked them to do. I think in the restrooms, going back to that topic of social distancing in the restrooms, I think that's going to be hard to do, but if we, you know, ask that everyone wear face masks while in common areas, that would include the restrooms, and I think that will help with, you know, containment and not contracting viruses there.
So one final question, and then I'll see if the panelists have some things that perhaps we didn't cover that they want to throw out there. Paul Meyer, who leads the architectural studio Workplace, asks, is anyone forming any kind of, using any form of contact tracing as states and businesses begin to reopen? And this kind of gets to the data collection side of things. What are companies doing to take ownership of the data around their own populations in terms of potential exposures and trying to trace those within their employee populations? I know this is possibly more of an HR question, but I'm just curious. Steve, David, Buddy, what are your thoughts on that matter?
Yeah, so we do have this as part of an HR policy, and for people who have diagnosed with COVID or have a potential exposure or secondary exposure, they have a policy where they go through and they have a tree formula. So they go down to second level exposures to track. So we've had several cases where it's been the wife of an employee or a friend of the child's of an employee who's had a potential exposure. So we go to the second level down the tree. It blows up pretty quick after that. And then we follow the policy on the self-quarantine and through the testing before they can return to work. But that's as far as we carry it. They're careful with not tripping over HIPAA guidelines too, with
right,
getting too much information.
Yeah, David, how about you? Do you have any?
Yeah, I think it's more that first level of tracing that we're doing mostly within our facilities. Again, HIPAA is a large consideration, and so we're fairly sensitive and mostly leveraging local authorities as we report up cases to follow up on that vein.
Buddy, what about you on that question?
We've not done any tracing yet internally. I think where I would encourage people to really focus their efforts, especially if they're reopening, is going to be on doing preventative treatments, and cleaning of spaces if they have not been cleaned. And again, I think it's very important to pay attention to whatever janitorial service or cleaning service you're using, or that is telling you they can provide your products that can kill any of the known coronaviruses, because that's really what their kill claim letters are going to state, is that you get those kill claim letters off the CDC site that show that they have proven kill ratio that is acceptable, and then the SDS sheet also on the chemical, but then the process that's being used. And then the other thing that I think is extremely important along those lines, to communicate all of that proactively to your tenants, your employees, whatever you're doing, so everybody is aware of what you're doing. And if you're going to repeat that, do the communications and continue to keep communicating to your employees about how you're keeping them safe.
Got it. So we're getting close to our time. I'm actually going to finish this webinar early, which for those of you that know me well is a virtual impossibility, because I do like to go on sometimes. But final question for anyone on the panel, legal considerations. What conversations have you possibly had with your corporate attorneys about do's and don'ts in terms of procedures and ways of dealing with reopening the workplace? Anybody have anything there? Buddy, have you spoken to counsel about any of these matters?
We have. We've had extensive conversations with counsel about all of this, and primarily from my perspective, it was regarding entry into buildings and what we could do to keep people safe and healthy, while at the same time minimizing our liability exposure if we deny somebody access to the building. And with regards to that, the counsel we've been given is to post, with as much building signage as we can, what we're trying to do here to keep people safe, and that we respectfully request, if people are symptomatic and we outline what those symptoms are based off CDC guidelines, that you do not enter the building. We request that you wear the proper face mask equipment if you would. But as far as denying people into the building based off of thermal scanning or imaging, we've been given counsel not to do that as a landlord at this time.
Okay. Steve, David, anything to add on that?
No, we just operate within the posted guidelines from CDC, local and federal governments to keep us safe. We will be more restrictive than that, but not less restrictive. And in terms of access, we have, as the owner of the business, the right to protect our internal staff. So we set those limits. If people don't want to be scanned, then they're not coming in. So we just take that stance. But that's a stance we have at Auto Times. Basically, you adhere to our policies, or you don't come onto our site.
Yeah, and your facilities have typically been much higher security than a lot
we
of folks that
federal
are.
contracts and things that dictate how we act. So.
Yeah. Okay. Final opportunity here. Is there anything we haven't talked about that one of the panelists really wants to jump in and?
I'd like to point out one thing. We talked about communications, and we talked about communicating how we're cleaning the equipment and the chemicals we're using, things like that, to keep the employees or your customer base feeling comfortable and confident what you're doing. And that's great, and it's very important. I think hand in hand to that, and we've done that here, had to do it here, is the continual education on the facts of how it's transmitted. So someone early in the discussion mentioned gloves, and gloves can be good. They're not better than your skin. They are your skin. It's the same thing. Sanitizer is good. It does not replace hand washing. Hand washing is the best. So what we've seen is that when people come in with gloves and they think, I've got a glove on so I'm protected, they touch a potentially surface that could be contaminated, say. They reach in their back pocket and they use their phone, and then they don't think they just contaminated their phone, right? Because they think, I got a glove on, I'm protected. You're not. I've actually seen somebody do that and eat food with their glove on, and it was in Costco. They were touching everything because I happened to see the fella, and then he goes in and buys food and he's eating it. I think you're not protected. So sometimes all those things we're doing can give a false sense of protection if you don't understand the real control mechanism. So I think that continual education is important.
That's a great observation, Steve. Really good. Anything else that we haven't covered, panelists? All right. Well, I guess that's a wrap. I really, really appreciate you all contributing this time. We did record the session. We recorded the webinar. We'll be posting this on our website along with the other resources that we've put up in the Knowledge Center. Every one of the panelists on this call is a colleague, a friend, and in many cases, a client of Workplace Architecture and Design. We appreciate your contribution to the webinar, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks very much.